Good, I said. Just that. The small word, the full container. Not let's plan it. Not what will you make. Not a single anxious, useful syllable to rush the rising tide. Just good. I felt you turn. I'm glad. Take all the time the tide takes. My Playful Wife. Episode 36. The Four of Us. Written by Mia. On the last night we ate at his table, the four of us, the dinner we had promised on a Delhi morning 2 years ago when the promising of it had felt like reciting a sentence in a language none of us yet spoke. I remember the promising. It was early in the thaw, one of the first calls that had lost its blade, and somebody, Mira, probably, it is always Mira, had said the words the four of us should have dinner, the four of us at our table when you come south, and we had all agreed the way you agree to a thing you do not quite believe will happen, a thing that belongs to some better behaved version of your family that exists only in the conditional tense. The four of us at a table. It had sounded then like a foreign phrase you repeat after a teacher without understanding the grammar of a kind of family we were not, the four of us being at that point a quantity that had never once successfully occupied a single room without something in it going wrong. And now here we were, the conditional tense made indicative, the foreign sentence spoken at last in our own fluent mouths, the four of us at his table, in his city, on an ordinary Thursday, eating. I have thought, since, about how many of the best things in a life arrive first in the conditional tense, as a someday, a when you come south, a we should, spoken lightly and half-believed, filed under the pleasant fictions a family tells itself to stay tender across distance. Most of them never leave the conditional. They stay someday forever, and the family ages, and the dinner is never actually had, and nobody quite notices the loss, because a someday that quietly expires makes no sound when it goes. Ours had crossed over. Ours had become a real Thursday with real food on it, and the crossing over of a single someday, I have come to believe, is rarer and more precious than we ever let ourselves know. I had decided beforehand that I was going to be awake for it. This was not incidental. It was the whole project of the evening privately on my side of the table, to be entirely present for the good thing while it was happening, which is, I have come to believe, the single hardest discipline there is, and the one almost nobody practices. Because here is the strange treason we commit against our own best evenings. We leave them while we are still sitting in them. You are at the table, the rare assembled table, everyone you love in one warm room and nothing wrong, and some traitor mechanism in the mind begins, even as it happens, to convert the evening into a memory of the evening, to stand slightly outside it, narrating, already filing it under things that were nice, already half composing the account you will give of it later so that you are never quite in the room, only adjacent to it, watching yourself be at the dinner instead of being at the dinner. I suspect this is why so many people photograph their happiness so compulsively now, the phone up at every good moment, the meal shot before it is eaten, not vanity, or not only vanity, but a kind of quiet panic, an attempt to seize a thing they can already feel themselves failing to be present for, to at least secure the evidence of the joy if they cannot quite manage to inhabit the joy. But the photograph is not the evening. The photograph is the receipt for an evening you were too busy documenting to attend. I left the phone in my pocket all night. I had decided this once to attend. I have done it my whole life. The better the moment, the more I have tended to absent myself from it in exactly this way, as though happiness were too bright to look at directly and had to be viewed through the smoked glass of anticipated nostalgia. And I had decided this once at this table, not to stay in it, to be a man actually present at the best dinner of his year while it was irreversibly and only once occurring. It is harder than it sounds. I had to keep catching myself drifting out, into the photograph I might take, into the notebook entry I would write, into the future tense where this evening would be a fond thing remembered, and hauling myself back into the present tense, the only tense anything actually happens in, the warm loud now of the four of us at the table. Stay, I kept telling myself, the way you gentle a dog. Stay. You will have the rest of your life to remember this. You have only this one evening to be in it. There is a paradox folded into this that I have not fully untangled, that the act of trying to stay present can itself become a kind of absence, a narration, a watching yourself watch. The mind is slippery that way. It will turn even your effort to be in the room into one more place to stand outside it. The only escape I have found is to stop trying to hold the moment and simply let the moment hold me, to put down the effortful grasping after presence and let the warm noise of the table reach in and take me, the way you stop swimming and let the water carry you, and discover, with some surprise, that you float. And it was, when I stayed in it, almost unbearably good in the way that only ordinary things can be. My brother cooked, which I had not known he could do, another page in the file I never reopened. The 15-year-old who couldn't boil an egg having become a man who quietly makes a thing with 5 kinds of patience in it and sets it down without fuss. Mira ran the table the way she runs everything, refilling before you knew you were empty, the logistics of hospitality so smooth it disappeared, which is the highest form of the art. Saloni, my off-duty, unhooked, fallow wife, nobody's maker tonight, was loose and funny in a way the deadline had pressed out of her for months, telling a long, ridiculous story about a buyer's impossible request with her hands moving the way they move when she is happy, and Mira was crying with laughter, and my brother was doing the dry commentary thing I had only just discovered he did. And the room was full of the particular noise that I had spent the cold-blade decade believing our family was constitutionally incapable of making, the noise of people enjoying each other. I want to be precise about how strange it was to sit inside that noise, because for the whole cold decade I had carried, without once examining it, a quiet conviction that our family was simply not built for this, that some families are warm and ours was not, that we were a people of careful distances and managed truces, and that the easy, uproarious affection other families seemed to come by naturally was, for us, structurally unavailable, a thing we lacked the parts for. I had been wrong. We had the parts the whole time. We had only mislaid the conditions. Put the 4 of us at a table with the blade finally gone, and the warmth came up out of us, as if it had been waiting underground for a decade for permission to surface. We talked about the parents. Of course we did. You cannot get 2 brothers at a table without the parents arriving as the invisible 3rd and 4th chairs. But here was the thing the awake years had bought, the thing I would not have believed possible during the cold decade. We talked about them warmly. We laughed. My brother did our father's way of clearing his throat before delivering an opinion nobody had asked for, and I did our mother's specific telephone voice, the one she puts on only for relatives she is competing with, and the wives laughed, and we laughed, and the parents, who had spent years being the disputed territory between us, the very ground we fought our blade war over, became for one evening simply what they were. 2 flawed people who had loved us imperfectly and were now old, one of them with a bad knee, and whom we had both, separately and now together, decided to forgive for the crime of having been human while in charge of us. You know a wound has truly closed when you can finally laugh at the thing that made it. We laughed at the thing that made it. The laughter was the scar tissue, strong and a little numb and entirely healed. My brother caught my eye while we were laughing at our father, and there was a flicker in it of the old thing. Not pain, just acknowledgement, the briefest mutual nod to the fact that we both knew exactly how unlikely this laughter was, how far each of us had traveled to be able to make it together, how recently the very same material had been a wound and was now a joke. We did not speak it. We just let the flicker pass between us, 2 men who had buried a war, and went back to laughing, and the not speaking of it was, once again, the whole of the tenderness. There was a moment, there is always a moment if you stay awake for it, when I looked up from my plate and around the table and understood, with the force of something physical, that this was it. This was the thing. Not the December room, not the triumph, not the slow flame of the centerpiece pouring through a room full of strangers, not any of the grand, bright moments a life gets photographed for. This. For ordinary people who loved each other, eating dinner in a southern flat on a Thursday, the food good, the wine poured, the old war buried, the laughter real. I looked at my brother, restored to me after a decade I had assumed was permanent. I looked at Mira, who had held the door of reconciliation open with both hands and a calendar full of booked tickets until the rest of us were brave enough to walk through it. I looked at my wife, unhooked and laughing and entirely herself, the most unmapped country I will ever be lucky enough to spend a life failing to fully chart. And I understood, the way you understand a thing in the body and not the head, that the whole enormous machinery of a life, the work, the striving, the collections and the deadlines and the notebooks, all of it exists for the sole purpose of buying you, now and then, an ordinary Thursday like this one. The striving is the means. This is the end. We get the striving confused with the end constantly, spend our whole lives treating the Thursdays as the gaps between the important things, when the Thursdays are the important things, the only things, the actual cargo the whole ship was built to carry. I think most unhappiness, the chronic, low, causeless kind, is just this confusion run long. A life spent treating the means as the end, chasing the next deadline and the next acquisition under the standing assumption that the good table is the thing you will finally get to once the striving is done, never noticing that the striving is never done, that there is no once, that the good table is not the reward waiting at the finish line of the work, but a thing you have to deliberately stop and sit down at here, tonight, in the unfinished middle of everything, or else never at all. I did not say any of this at the table. You do not say it. Saying it would break it, would turn the warm now into a speech, would make everyone self-conscious and convert the evening prematurely into the memory I was working so hard not to convert it into. I just held it. I sat in the warm, loud middle of the best dinner of my year and held the whole understanding silently, awake, present in the room, and let it be enough simply to know, while it was happening, that it was happening.
Saloni caught me at it. She always catches me.
Across the table, in the middle of her own laughter, she found my face doing whatever my face does when I am holding too much at once, and she gave me the look, the collar, the private sentence, the wordless language we built in the bad year and now speak across crowded rooms and dinner tables and the whole width of a life. The look said, I see you seeing it. The look said, you're all the way here tonight, aren't you? The look said the thing only she could say to me across that particular table, which was, we made it. Look where we are. 2 years ago, you came in off a balcony, unable to say a true word, and tonight you are sitting awake and full at your brother's table in the South, holding more than you can hold, and I am across the table watching you hold it, and this is what all of it was for. I lifted my glass to her, a small private inch of a gesture that nobody else at the table read as anything but a man reaching for his drink, and she lifted hers back the same secret inch, and we drank to the thing without naming it, the way our family carries everything in the smallest available container, and then we went back to the dinner, to the loud warm now, to the 4 of us at the table being, for one whole ordinary irreplaceable Thursday evening, an actual family. Later, much later, when the dishes were done and Mira had finally been persuaded to stop organizing and my brother had gone quiet in the contented way I was still learning to recognize, Saloni and I lay in the narrow guest bed in the dark, and she said, into my shoulder. I needed this more than I knew. Not the rest. The opposite of the rest, almost. I needed to be reminded what the work is for. A pause. The southern night warm at the window. I think I want to make something again. Not yet. But I can feel it. The wanting starting to come back. Like a tide turning. I'd stopped being able to feel it in the empty room. I can feel it now. And I lay very still, because I knew what I was hearing. I was hearing the fallow end. Not with a decision, not with a deadline, not with anyone pushing. Just the slow, natural turning of a field that has lain empty long enough, beginning, on its own quiet schedule, to think about the spring. The dinner had done it. The being carried had done it. The four of us at the table, the old war buried, the love assembled and witnessed, had refilled some well in her that 2 years of deadlines had run dry, and now the water was rising again, and she could feel it, and she was telling me, in the dark, the way she tells me everything now, sideways, softly, the most important news of a season folded into a sentence murmured into a shoulder. Good, I said. Just that. The small word, the full container. Not let's plan it. Not what will you make. Not a single anxious, useful syllable to rush the rising tide. Just good. I felt you turn. I'm glad. Take all the time the tide takes. I have learned that there is an enormous difference between the silence that waits and the silence that pressures. Though from the outside the two can look identical. The pressuring silence is only a question holding its breath, a held expectation the other person can feel against their skin, a so well what are you going to make then dressed up as patience. The waiting silence asks nothing at all. It is genuinely at peace with whatever comes or doesn't. Saloni can tell the two apart instantly, the way she can find the true of a grain by touch, and the only reason my single small good had any power to comfort her was that it was the real waiting kind, with no held question hiding anywhere inside it. I wrote it in the 5th notebook on the last morning, before we packed, in the brothers' kitchen, in a light that was not our October light but was, I thought, a southern cousin of it. The four of us, the promised dinner, finally spoken fluent, stayed awake for it on purpose. The whole project of the evening. Be eyeing the good thing while it happens. Don't leave it for the memory of it while still sitting in it. The strange treason we commit against our own best evenings. He cooked another page in the file I never reopened. We laughed about the parents, warmly. You know a wound's closed when you can laugh at what made it. The moment of looking up and understanding this is the thing, not the triumph. The Thursday, the striving is the means, the ordinary love table is the end, and we spend our lives getting them confused. Held it without saying it. Saloni caught me. We drank to it without naming it. And in the dark she said the tide's turning. She wants to make something again. The fallow's ending. On its own schedule, no one pushing. I said good and nothing else. The whole art now is to not rush the rising water. And below it, the working line. Be present for the good evenings. It is harder than being present for the bad ones, and it matters more, and almost no one does it, because joy is somehow more frightening to look at directly than grief. Stay in the room. You'll have the rest of your life to remember it. You only get the one night to be in it. The Thursdays are not the gaps between the cargo. The Thursdays are the cargo. Tomorrow we fly north, home, back to our own October light and the empty workroom that will not, I think, stay empty very much longer because something has turned in her quietly in the south at a table with the four of us at it, and I am carrying home, along with the bag Mira has certainly overpacked for us, the single most important thing a trip can give you, which is the renewed and specific knowledge of what the whole striving life is actually for. To be continued in episode 37. The Way Home.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 36 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.